The figure of St. John Bosco stands out as a living icon. It is not by chance that we have this message given to us on this day in the reading that accompanies the saint. Keep doing all the things that you learned from me and have been taught by me and have heard or seen that I do. There is a lot of truth in the old saying, your actions speak so loudly that I can't hear what your words are saying. A teacher, especially a teacher of young children, is an icon of Christ and has to transmit something of his face. The attraction of this character was something else. We had in that same reading an invitation to joy. It is a very free translation that we have here. The original would simply be, rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice, a verse which actually has come into canon. Rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say, that goes into canon and one can repeat it. And the invitation then is one to joy in the Lord, in which there is peace. He asks that the attitude be one of, now here it's brought forth as tolerance. It's actually a difficult word to translate in the Greek, but it contains an element of measure, balance, goodness, kindness, lenience. There has to be a measure every time that one exercises authority, and this is picked up by St. John Bosco in his teaching. He sees the task of a teacher as being of a massive importance because of the responsibility that that person exercises. He wields the authority of the parents, actually, and in a sense of God the Father himself. He asks, therefore, for patience and precisely an element of measure in the way that they are handled. That was how Jesus treated his apostles. He put up with their ignorance and dullness and their lack of faith. His attitude towards sinners was full of kindness and loving friendship. This, says St. John Bosco, astonished some and scandalized others. But to others, it gave enough hope to ask forgiveness from God. When doing teacher training with little children way back in Wales, we were taught this, that if one gives the child his category, if one comes at that child and gives him to understand that he's an official nuisance or a bad child, that is what he will carry with him, and he will carry on to behave accordingly. It's extremely dangerous. One sees in every human being the immortal gem and the possibility that that has for glory. And we actually can make the difference by our attitude. Because the boys are our sons, he says, we must put aside all anger when we correct their faults, or at least restrain it so much that it is almost completely suppressed. I remember being taught that as well. Never go to the maximum, and never threaten something that you can't carry out. There must be no angry outburst, no look of contempt, no hurtful words. A very bad policy is to start bringing up things and to start accusing the child of earlier things. He may well have had complete forgiveness of that, and we have no right to do so. Instead, like true fathers, really intent on their correction and improvement, show them compassion at the present moment and hold out hope for the future. But then he goes on to that category which are those of the really problematic, and they always are around. There's usually someone who was particularly difficult to handle in a class. In serious matters, it is better to ask God's help in humble prayer than to make a long speech that wounds those who hear it and does no good at all to the guilty ones. Now that applies to parents, obviously, because the same issues arise. How to obtain authority without losing dignity. In the Gospel, we see the Lord's tenderness. He actually elevates childhood to a very high level. In a sense, he's saying this child is the greatest, because the question is that one. Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? So he called a little child to him and set the child in front of them. I tell you solemnly, unless you change and become like little children. On it goes. We must never underestimate a child. I was celebrating Mass the other day for travelling people, and always one gets a certain proportion of children around, and I noticed that one particular child, who was only 7, was extremely mature, and his mother did explain to him, yes, he's a little adult. And she also went on to say, treat them as a little adult and they will behave like a little adult. And I have found actually amazing surprises in the world of children, that there is quite often a real rapport with a clean and pure soul in the child, if that child really is treated as an individual, talked to with his dignity. And also I have noticed, especially in families of great faith, that heaven is very much present in the little children. I found little children wanting to serve, for instance, on a Sunday at Mass at a very early age. We now have 6 altar boys, and the older ones, who are young themselves, form very easily the younger ones. And we have tiny ones who haven't yet made their first communion. One who's 6, another one who's 4. But they're extremely attentive, and they do pick up things. You put them next to the real presence, and they are calmed and hushed, and they somehow pick up things. They know things without knowing them. And we must not presume that they have to have anything flashy or jazzy to divert them. It doesn't quite work like that. A child has a great capacity sometimes actually to be still. And quite a few of the children who we have on a Sunday do actually do adoration, and they're quite well able to do so in their own terms. So we mustn't think that we have to be very much ultra-modern to get the children on board. Having said that, one has to know how to be both a good educator and good company. And that brings me to something specific in the case of John Bosco, because he was both. He learned how to conjure. He could do conjuring tricks. He was a magnet. He had this goodness which drew the young towards him. He was also good fun. And he had their heart. One day, he went to the prison authorities, because there was a place of correction there where the children were more or less under prison conditions and they could not go out. And he, first of all, heard the confessions of all the boys in there, and then went to the authorities and with insistence asked that they could have a day out, which is completely unheard of, with him. And he explained to them they're all in a state of grace, and I can guarantee you they will all come back and not do a single thing wrong. And he insisted, and he got his way, and so it was. A day out from prison, all because they had confidence in him. It brings me to the case of our own monastery in Italy, which was a centre of youth ministry. They would come by the 100, the young people, and they would camp. And it had to be therefore the same balance, because to get to the point whereby in the course of the Easter Triduum you would hear the confessions of no less than 500 or 600 boys and girls, you had to therefore to have a whole means of, in the meantime, keeping them occupied with prayer and activity. And the brethren, because they were all young, were pretty good at doing that. But it was an interesting blend. The secret, of course, is to have good people amongst themselves who share the burden, delegation, picking out responsible young people, and then one has everyone on board. But the question of producing holy fun is important. I've noticed actually at the end of Mass on a Sunday and confessions, while I'm hearing confessions still, Latin what I mean now, quite often when I come out, I find the little children playing quite happily amongst themselves. It's interesting that they immediately know where there is goodness and innocence, and that's one thing that attracts the parents to that. They know they have safe friends to play with. It's interesting. Healthy friends. And by the way, be careful. If you have authority over children, either as grandparents or as parents, be careful who they play with, because that's where things start to go wrong. They hear bad words and so on, and peer pressure is huge, as you know. Having said that, learn also yourselves to play with them. It's important to know how to play with a child and invest quality time in that useless apparent occupation. It's far better than leaving them with a screen or a toy which makes them hyped up. In our own community, I noticed how they were able to get them on board also by the creation of beauty. Young people and children actually like creating beauty. I found that very quickly also in other cultures. When I was doing teacher training, I found, of course, it was in Wales, but the children loved to sing and even to go into harmony. So these canons were very interesting. When I was going away from one school, at the end of the teaching practice there, what they invented was, as a farewell present, a dance. It was very well executed. They themselves invented it and executed it. They also loved acting, and especially if you acted with them and played the fool, but in a good way. They loved that, and straight away what happened? You got them on board. Play with them and you've got them. Create joy with them and you've got their confidence, and they won't upset you and they'll listen to you. So it's a whole art, getting a child on board. I noticed the same actually in Romania, and they've got a problem because you've got a different language. When we were playing with children, with the nuns there, what I found very easily was there are certain games which the nuns knew very well, which worked perfectly well. And the great thing was there, in a country of great poverty, where they're not contaminated with modern games, there's no money for that kind of thing, they only have ordinary games. And it was great fun to play with these tiny children from the age of 4 up to the age of 22 as the oldest. There were 2 gypsies there, and the nuns. Great natural games. It was far more fun than leaving them with some gadget. But then we found also we could get them to pray by doing what? Take them into the chapel and put them in song mode. Again, these canons. Teaching them canons, that means you get them into harmony immediately, put them in groups and you get them to sing one line, and you've got a harmony, and they love producing harmony. Don't underestimate a child. I just want to finish. John Bosco did this all in view of one thing, essentially, saving the immortal souls. Now, one day he had a vision. He saw, strangely enough, in vision, it was more than a dream, either a dream which was sort of a vision or whatever it was, but it was definitely supernatural. He saw a lot of his pupils going down towards the brink of hell and about to be lost. And he couldn't believe it or understand it after all his work. And he was given to understand 3 things. There was a danger of that happening for 3 motives. And he communicated that to his children afterwards. One was bad habits. Another was bad books. Translate for us. Bad DVDs, etc. The third was bad companions. That's everlastingly true. So there were occasions. That applies to us too, by the way. Bad habits, bad books, that means for us also anything which we see on screens, and bad companions. By osmosis, we are influenced, for better or for worse, by those that we willingly expose ourselves to. Is it not true? We bring ourselves down or we pull ourselves up, according to who's next to us. I just conclude that same John Bosco also had one particular dirigé, the youngest saint in the church, canonized, as far as I know, canonized. It's St. Dominic Savio, the schoolboy saint, who was an amazing character if one reads his life, an amazing character. And he had gifts. And St. John Bosco copped on that he had gifts. And that same Don Savio was somebody who actually had an influence on me when I was his age in school, because I wanted to know where to go, which church to belong to. I was still at that time a Baptist, and I walked into a Catholic church and I felt prodded to go to the back of it and look into the rack of the CTS pamphlets, and I immediately saw this title, The Schoolboy Saint. I opened it and my eyes fell on a page which had this in it. He had an ecstasy, a vision, and told it to Don Bosco. It was this. He saw a great field full of dark mist and gloom, and suddenly he saw a pontiff appearing and standing in the midst of it with a bright lamp which dispelled the mist and the gloom. And he was given to understand the field was England. The pontiff was the Holy Father, and he explained that he'd seen this, and John Bosco understood it was a reference to what was happening and was going to make a difference. The hierarchy was going to be re-established in England. And so it was. It was enough for me to understand, because I could have gone either way. My mother wanted me to become an Anglican because there were lots of Anglican vocations in the family on her side, and I had also interest in the Eastern Orthodox Church. Actually, it was the Eastern Orthodox priest of Cardiff who taught me how to read Greek, and I was moved by their liturgy. So High Anglicanism, my best friend was a High Anglican, the son of a High Anglican vicar, and he now is a priest himself, an Anglican. That was a great attraction, and this was a clear answer. Whatever the claims, the truth is precisely with the pontiff. One can't have that fullness of the truth without the fullness of the church structure, which has to have in the midst Peter, Kephas, the rock. I conclude, teach the children. Don't just give them fun and games, but put in the plug. Teach them catechism and fullness of truth, because they only get it at that age nowadays, and it's the only chance you've got. And they will remember the first words, the first truth taught. Don't let it be preempted by someone else. Give them, in their own terms, messages which they understand, and sometime later it will reappear. Oh, that rings a bell. Many young people presume that, for instance, suicide is just an alternative, because no one tells them the truth, and nothing but the truth.